So there's a quote I've seen popping up in actually a few places recently, and it's one of the best quotes out there that I've seen that really captures the intention behind having a brainstorm session. And it's, "The best way to have a good idea is to have lots of ideas," by Linus Pauling. But a lot can get in the way of a good brainstorm. So in this episode, we'll talk about the do's and don'ts of a brainstorm right after this word from our sponsor. Artificial intelligence has taken mainstream conversation by storm. So many industries are finding innovative ways to use this technology.
Image generation, coding, text.
Well, we got to thinking, what are other ways we can apply this technology?
We looked at other mainstream conversations for convergence opportunities.
There's sports.
But not everyone follows sports.
Politics.
Blech, no thank you.
Then we thought, the weather.
And everything just clicked.
It took us a few prototypes.
Hey Marvin, describe an umbrella.
An umbrella is a folding canopy device in a dome shape created by attaching flexible spokes to a central pole. It is often used to protect humans from getting wet in the rain, or in some instances, to prevent them from being exposed to too much sun.
But we finally landed on a design.
Artificial umbrella is the world's first artificial umbrella.
Sure, there are certain things it can't get right.
Like blocking out rain.
Or sun.
But leveraging AI technology has streamlined production.
Simply text us your order.
And you'll receive a text or image-based umbrella to use whenever you need.
You can customize them.
Or get them for family members and pets.
And they'll go anywhere.
There's really no end to the possibilities.
Artificial umbrella.
Find us wherever umbrellas aren't sold. Welcome to Almost Productive, a podcast mostly about marketing.
I'm Sean.
I'm Julie.
And I'm Addie.
And we are all marketing professionals at New Boston Creative Group in Manhattan, Kansas. All right, gang. Well, that sounds like it would come in really handy. But today, before we kick things off about brainstorming, I want to talk about guilty pleasures. Should pleasures be guilty?
The first thing that popped into my head was a lot of people view like romance novels as a guilty pleasure. And I think that that's silly, or thrillers, or, things that are a little more fluffy to read versus the classics or new, like really hot pieces. So I'm sure that shame is justified in some arenas, but I think often if you're getting enjoyment out of something, then yeah, maybe we remove guilty.
Yeah, I agree. Life is too difficult to feel bad about doing something that makes you feel good. I don't think we need that ever. Yeah. And don't shame other people for what they do. Like, just let everybody have a good time.
Definitely agree. If that's a title that you're putting onto one of your own hobbies or enjoyments, then maybe fine. Some self-deprecation never hurt anyone. But if you're putting that onto other people, then yeah, that feels a little bit like not bullying, but kind of. Right. That's just not very nice.
Just let people enjoy
I really
things.
enjoy this. That's stupid. Get out of here.
Exactly.
Right.
So on that note, what are some of y'all's guilty pleasures?
Tough right now because I have no time for pleasures. I'm a father again to a 7-month-old.
Being a new father is its own kind of pleasure, though,
yeah,
right?
okay, sure.
Yeah.
Mine is the antithesis of what Sean just said. Mine is sleeping in. Like on the weekends, I don't set an alarm and I'll sleep in. So that's top of mind because I'm kind of sleepy right now.
Well, we'll do this as our ASMR episode then and make sure we
exactly.
really
If my voice starts droning, it'll be great.
I think the latest example I have right now is as I've gotten older I'm going back and like refinding things I enjoyed as a kid, and one of which is adult versions of toys. So as a kid, I really loved Transformers as like an action figure toy that I played with all the time. And what's been great is they have continued to make these, but make them they're not for kids. Like The ones that people like me now purchase are very expensive and very complicated, and they're just like these show pieces. And it's been really fun to sort of like get back into that world and make a purchase or two and see what I enjoy about that. And they just sit on your desk and whatnot. But that's been kind of fun. But that's definitely, I think, in the guilty pleasure category, because I am wasting money that could be better spent on something else. I should probably feel guilty about it.
Don't.
No.
Everyone needs hobbies.
Yeah, I equate it with hobbies too, Addie. Yeah. Well, excellent. Let's dive in. I love a brainstorm. And something I love, not just generating the quantity of ideas, like the quote I shared, but I like the togetherness of generating them. I think that's really important because one person sitting in a room coming up with a bunch of ideas is very different from 3 or 4 people doing that. So I have more quotes. One from Ken Blanchard is, "None of us is as smart as all of us." And then one from Mother Teresa, "I can do things you cannot. You can do things I cannot. Together, we can do great things." So, what are some things that you all think makes for a good brainstorm?
I think a non-judgmental environment. So not being scared that an idea is just going to immediately get swatted out of the air and called stupid.
And I think the speed of ideas, like you want to get them out quickly. I don't like when an idea comes out and then people spend a little too much time discussing that one idea. I'd rather let's dump a bunch of stuff and then we can go back over it. Let's not stop the flow of generating ideas initially.
Wow, you all hit on my first two. Like if I'm leading a brainstorm, I have ground rules. And one is a safe atmosphere, Addie. One is no discussion. And then the third for me is the rule of improv, to say yes and to build off of other people's ideas. So to really listen to what people are saying. And, we do this a lot. Addie and I are on the same team. And when we brainstorm, we'll be like, oh, going back to that idea. And so one idea may start at point A and end up at point L because of all these different brains saw these different connections. So to just go with that and keep building off of one another. Any other rules that you all would add?
I don't have a rule to add, but I do like that structure a lot. So kind of setting the ground rules in the beginning, I think is super, super helpful rather than just going in blind and saying, okay, gang, we're going to have a brainstorm. Here's what we're talking about. So kind of laying the land, that foundation at the start is super important.
I have another sub rule, and I'm sorry, Sean, but is to avoid bosses in the room. Or if you have bosses, make sure they understand these ground rules too, because it can be very intimidating if, say you've got an intern and a boss in a room. The intern's trying to impress the boss. They're not going to feel free to let me just say anything. Or if you get a disapproving face from a boss, that's going to change the dynamic and people's creativity will kind of clamp up. So, if possible, avoid. But if they're there, just make sure they are, they're in on all the ground rules too.
No, that makes sense because, we're there to be the buzzkill. Absolutely. So avoid us. Bring us your best ideas later.
Very intimidating.
Yeah. Voice of reason is important, but not in that particular scenario.
Right.
What about what would make a bad brainstorm? I guess the things we've just talked about. What a stupid idea, Julie.
Just shooting them down as they come out, which is just going to kill the vibe.
It doesn't make a brainstorm good or bad, but how you feel at the end of a brainstorm or even in the middle is very telling of how it's going. So if you have a bunch of people who are sitting around staring at each other and there are crickets and nothing is really happening, that also doesn't feel good. So you come away from that not feeling great. So I think there's an aspect of listening to yourself and also freeing up yourself in the process.
Right. Because I think there's an expectation that you're going to generate so many ideas, whatever that is. And if it's a struggle to get to something that feels good, you're going to feel like, oh no, even the ideas we came up with maybe aren't very good.
And in terms of listening to yourself, if you have the runway that's long enough to reschedule, like if you're about to start or if it's the day that you're supposed to brainstorm, and your mindset matters. Like sometimes you're in a mood to write, sometimes you're in a mood to do more data-driven stuff. So I think if you're about to start the meeting and your brain is just not there, then maybe you push a day or two to where you're in a more creative zone.
How about, since AI is getting a lot of discussion these days, do you use AI for a brainstorm? If so, at what point do you think people should bring that into the mix? What are your thoughts on that?
I definitely use it for initial ideas a lot of times. And it depends on where I'm at in my process. If I'm having trouble getting started, it can be a good useful tool to like have it generate a bunch of bad ideas that then I can jump off of. Or sometimes I've got a list of my own ideas. Let's just double check that ChatGPT doesn't have something I haven't thought of, just as a double check. So it sort of depends.
Yeah, same. I think I more use it in the second use case that Sean just mentioned. So kind of running my ideas by ChatGPT. And maybe not even asking it to develop additional ones, but like poke holes in, which I guess we've passed the brainstorm at that point, but poke holes in my ideas or kind of develop pros and cons to each of those, which again isn't really a brainstorm, but that's most often when I bring in AI.
I heard something recently that was sort of like that, where you're using AI to kind of check your own personal tastes and bias and that sort of thing. I know a lot of people do use it to generate ideas, but if you're sitting down with a group of people and one person turns to the computer and then just starts telling you what AI has told them, I find that to be jarring to the vibe of a brainstorm. So I tend not to favor it as like, you know, the brainstorm is we've got human minds sitting down together, like let's play, let's be creative. Because if we're not doing that, I don't know. To me, that's fun. Maybe that's someone's idea of hell right there. But so I kind of favor it further on in the process. But I know since it's kind of the Wild West, people are still figuring out what they want and how they like to use it.
Yeah, I agree that in the middle of it, someone, like you said, turning to the computer and then rattling them off does sort of throw things off, because it turns into, well, do I just need to do that then? Like, are we all just prompting in AI now? Like, or are we, trying to come up with our own ideas? I think there's a set time to maybe include the AI and that sort of thing, but I think it needs to be maybe part of your ground rules of like, oh, we're doing it at the beginning to get these ideas out of the way, or maybe at the end, as Addie's mentioned, we'll use it to poke holes in the ones we came up with.
I like that, Sean, adding that to the ground rules. There are some frameworks that I've come across over the years that you can use to help facilitate a brainstorm. So one, Sean, you mentioned this earlier, is like set a number of ideas that you're trying to get to. So like we're getting to 50, and things can get really silly, really fast, just because you're trying to churn out numbers. But that's when people start to loosen up and get more creative. They're focusing more on quantity than quality, which is exactly what you want. Another style I've heard, but I haven't done this and I kind of really want to now, is to intentionally think of the worst way to solve the problem, the legit most terrible solution. So, and this also, you check legality at the door. You know, you don't worry about if something's legal or feasible, and you just say, what's the worst way to approach this goal? And I think that would actually be really fun, you know, just as a way to shake things up.
We do the bad idea brainstorm often in our team where we try to get to 50, and usually, yeah, we start with some bad ideas. Maybe not the most terrible idea, but some bad, bad ideas to get the juices flowing. And I really like that format a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. I think just calling it a bad idea, it opens things up to look, gang, you don't have to come up with the best idea. It doesn't have to be great. Like, again, loosen up.
I think that label really does help the mindset. Like people, myself included, always say, well, this isn't a great idea, but blah, 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 blah. And then you can just kind of drop that pretense and say this half-baked idea, and then that will lead to something else, which leads to something else. And then everyone, feels more comfortable.
Yeah. Or like sometimes when we have those, it's like, I have this idea. I know it's not good, but it's all I can think of. And it's like, I just need to say it to get it out of my brain so that we can, so that I can move on and allow other things to come in there. It's like, thinking to yourself, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. And then you do that thing. Like, yeah.
And the bouncing off of ideas might not even be directly related, but you could just say a word that sparks something in someone else's mind. So I think, just the more the merrier.
In a lot of what I've done in the past, as far as brainstorming, hasn't been like word related, but design related. But it works the same way. Like if I'm doing a logo, part of the process is how many ideas can I visually generate? And the same sort of prompting goes into it. Like how many ideas can I come up with, even if they're bad, even if someone else has done them, just get that out onto the computer or a piece of paper so that I can then move past them or adapt them or whatever I need to do. But just generating, it works the same way with the visuals as it does with the words.
Yeah. I love that you brought that up, Sean, because I also think if you can get someone who's more visual and someone who's more verbal in a brainstorm together, then that can be really interesting too, because the visual person might hear a word and go, oh, that makes me think of, and describe something which might inspire more words. Like, I think there's a lot of room for creativity there if you can also mix and match people's skills.
Yes, and that's where the yes-anding really helps, where you're not shooting down so that, for example, someone's like, you're building a website and someone's like, well, can this do that? And maybe your initial idea is like, no, it can't do that because of some technical reason. Go into it thinking, yes, that's a good idea. I don't know how to do it yet, but we'll figure it out. Or, something down the road. Don't initially shoot down just because of, some cross-discipline thing that someone doesn't know the why or why not something may not work. But it may help lead to something else.
Yeah, for sure. We talked about the evaluation stage because at some point we do have to evaluate the ideas because the object is ultimately to get to some to try. I think having separate sessions is ideal, in part because, the old saying, like, if you want ideas, go for a walk, take a shower, and more. So I think like once you get creative juices flowing in a brainstorm, your mind will continue to work on that project. So if you can, it feels very indulgent to say have 2 brainstorming sessions, but like maybe there's a brainstorm and then there's a refining and evaluating where people come together and said, yeah, I kept thinking about this. And then you're kind of poking your holes, analyzing what you think.
Yeah, I agree that separating the two makes sense because your mindset's also going to be different. You're in a very creative state to generate the ideas, but you need to be in a different state to then evaluate, and giving it that time to come back with fresh eyes and be like, oh, this still makes sense to me versus now I don't, I'm in a different state. So now this doesn't quite click as it used to, can help you have a different sort of viewpoint on the list of items that you have now.
I also like waiting, and I really appreciate when we don't do it in a meeting format, like whether that's sending an email or writing your initials next to something, because it makes it feel a little less personal if someone or the group at large doesn't like your idea. I think it can help people be a little bit more honest. And these are actually my 3 favorites, not the 3 favorites that I think are going to rise to the top at the end of this. So making that a little more depersonalized in that stage is helpful.
Yeah. Provided it's not too crazy, sometimes I take it a step further and I'm like, fill out a form and vote for your favorite. Because, like, you know, all you need to see are like, oh, well, 3 people have already initialed that one. I should put my initials too, because clearly that's the front runner and I don't want to be, you know, like there's so much subconscious choices and preferences that go into the evaluation. So I think there are different techniques you can use for sure. Like also just, okay, leader, here are the ideas. You take them. That's another option. Although if they weren't there for this session, that could be tricky. But if presumably they're closest to the project or the problem, they might, you know, they might be best informed to step in at that stage.
Right. Or sometimes maybe that makes sense for what you're doing, because a lot of times the final audience also wasn't a part of your brainstorm. So it sort of maybe has to make that jump to someone who doesn't know all the backstory of how you got to that idea.
Good point. And you could conceivably include them at some point, depending on your, you know, what you're working on and the production cycle for it. You know, put it out for focus groups, consumer feedback, all that jazz.
Absolutely.
Excellent. So I think we've pretty much solved everything about brainstorming for folks out there today. So go out, be creative. And as we wrap things up, as we often do, we have turned to producer Molly to provide us with a curated selection of jokes as we wrap up today. I had a great idea for a brainstorm meeting, but then we spent an hour coming up with new words for great. I don't know what that's not really a joke, but that's just it. That's a warm up. That's the opening act. Okay. Why don't oysters donate to charity? Because they're shellfish.
Nice.
I used to play piano by ears. Oh, shit. Wait, no. Sorry. Cut. I used to play piano by ear, but now I use my hands.
Love it.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Almost Productive. Before we go, we'd like to give a shout out to our producers, Nick and Molly, who work behind the scenes to make this podcast possible. If you'd like to learn more about what we do at New Boston Creative Group, you can reach out to us at newbostoncreative.com. You can also follow us on social media at New Boston Creative on Instagram and New Boston Creative Group on Facebook and LinkedIn. If you liked this episode, please like, follow, subscribe, leave a review, and share the podcast with your friends. And if you didn't like the show, feel free to recommend us to your enemies. Tune in next time for some more office shenanigans, thoughts on trending topics, and marketing-adjacent insights. Until next time, we hope you have a productive day.